All right, do you want me to just...
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Writers Chat. We're so glad to be with you this morning, whether you're here in the community or you're watching the replay. My name is Johnny Alexander. I'm here with my co-hosts, Jan Martin and Brandy Bro, and I'm going to shoot it over to Jan so that she can introduce our very special guest for today.
Morning. It's so nice to be able to see Dan again. It's been a while. He is a best-selling author of 25 novels, all available on Amazon, including The Unfinished Gift, Rescuing Riley, When Night Comes, The Reunion, which I can't wait, is going to be a movie. Over 1.2 million copies of Dan's books are in print or downloaded. He's won both the Carol and Selah Awards multiple times. 4 of his novels have been finalist for RT Review's Inspirational Novel of the Year. Reviewers often remark about Dan's rich character-driven storylines and page-turning suspense, even with his more inspirational books. He's been writing full-time since 2010. He and his wife, Cindy, have been married 45 years, have 2 grown children and 5 grandchildren. They live in the Daytona Beach area where Dan grew up. You can follow him on Facebook and read his blog or preview all of his books by visiting his website at danwalshbooks.com, and I'll put it in the chat. Thank you, Dan, so much for coming and sharing everything that you do with Indy Publishing for us.
Happy to do it. It's been quite a journey, that's for sure. Do you want to just kind of launch into it? I think maybe what we talked about email was that I'd kind of give something of an overview and then leave most of the time for questions, because I know even probably in the overview, it'll probably generate some questions, because I'm going to be doing thumbnail sketches, not anything in detail. Because I've taught, probably the last 3 or 4 years, when I used to be asked to speak at Writers Conference, it was about how to write. Mm-hmm. Since the Indy thing has kind of exploded, and I've done quite well, almost all my invitations have to do with Indy publishing, which I'm happy to do, because it's kind of a maze. It's not like there's a nice clear path. Just follow this path. It's been for me even, it's been quite a got the the map out. It's half finished and a machete going through the woods with it. So I've learned a lot. But yeah, I don't mind talking about it, because I definitely feel like it's helpful. It was helpful for me. I know that I had a few people early on, like James Scott Bell and Brandon Lynn Collins, who were pretty instrumental in helping kind of push me out of the nest. By the nest, I mean the traditional publishing world that I was wrapped up in. So I thought what I'd do is give you guys a little bit of an overview of, it's kind of funny, when I look at an overview of the transition or from traditional being king to Indy, well, I would not call Indy king now, but it's certainly there's, a parity there. There's definitely the Indy publishing scene is huge. And to give you an example of how radically changed it's been, my first novel came out in 2009 with Ravel, and my first royalty check, ebooks were 3%. Amazon was unknown almost. People hardly trusted it, back then. And you all, I'm sure, can remember, back then, to get books, you went to the bookstores. You went to the mom and pop store, or you went to the chain stores like Books A Million and Barnes and Noble, and whichever ones that existed now, because half of those are gone. When I talk back to my beginnings, it almost feels like when I talk about it, like it was 30 years ago, and it wasn't. It was like a decade or so. That's how much radical things have changed. I would probably liken it to, if you think about the way things were back in the horse and buggy era, and then this crazy thing called the automobile showed up, and people were just like not buying it, because you think of centuries of riding a horse, and if you're riding with without horseback, it's horse and carriage. And then all of a sudden this thing comes on there, and I even called it horseless carriage. Mm-hmm. And for a long time, people just didn't buy into the fact that this would work. And I'm sure there were horse and buggy companies, making booming business that never imagined that, in a decade or so, they'd be gone. because it took that long for people to take on. And I think the other transition I would like to do is back in the 80s and 90s, like when I was a pastor for 25 years before 2010. That's when I retired from ministry to write full time. In 1985, my first year as a pastorate, we communicated by typewriter. All my communication was typewriter. I remember having to put if I wanted copies, I had to put the little blue, sheet in there, carbon copy, and copy machines, and mail everything the old-fashioned way. There was no email, there's no thought of laptops or anything. And I remember when the transition was happening with that, typewriters have been, forever. People use typewriters, a century. And here comes these personal computer ideas, and people just didn't see. And a lot of companies, of course, didn't buy into the fact that this was real, and had nobody even foresaw, I think, the internet back then. And lo and behold, maybe within 10 years, 15 years, everyone's got a personal computer. First they were desktops, then they come out with laptops, and now they have tablets, now they have phones. It's like who uses a typewriter? In some ways, publishing, I think, is going through the last 10 years that kind of a shakeup, because for a century or more, publishing was the static norm, and this is how it was done, and this is how it was always done. And if you wanted to get published, this was the only way. And when I finished the manuscript of The Unfinished Gift, my first novel, there was no possibility of indie publishing. There was not even a thought that could happen. It wasn't even on anyone's radar. I don't think it was even really possible, because back then there was to publish at a printer, you had to have a minimum of like 5,000 copies to get one. And so people they used to call it vanity press or vanity publishing, because you had to be pretty vain to want to see your book on a book cover, to spend that kind of money, and then you have a garage full of books is what you had left for maybe getting a bunch of copies to pass out to friends. You certainly weren't going to sell them in bookstores, because bookstores would never accept you. So for me, when I finished that novel, my church that read it were like, "This is crazy good. You got to get this published." I'm like, "I don't know anything about publishing." And I looked into it. We did have AOL back then. I remember when AOL was king. You've got mail. I went on AOL and I found this Christian fiction board on AOL. And it's kind of funny, some of the people who were on there, like Terry Blackstock was on there, and a few others that have very big names, were like small names then. And I contacted them, and we had kind of rapport, and they basically told me, there's just no way you're going to get published unless you get a really good agent, because publishers now aren't even looking at stuff, people sending them in, but they've only pay attention now to agents. You got to get an agent. So I looked into how to get an agent, and I'm thinking, I'm a full-time pastor, but a fairly small church wearing a lot of hats. So it wasn't like I could do very much to market this. So I thought, okay, if I can get an agent, she can do it and maybe have a chance. So I gave it a shot. The first three, this Terry Blackstock gave me a list of the 15 best agents she knew of in the business. She said, make it through those. And if you make it through those, meaning I get rejected by them all, get back with me and I'll give you another list, which I guess would be the B list. And two of the first three said, I want to read the book. This is crazy good. Let me see it. They had the same reaction as my church people did. And one of them asked for, the one I wound up with, she asked me to send it over the internet. And the other one asked me to the old-fashioned way, which is print up a box of pages and mail a box of the book manuscript. And of course, the one that was like I literally had to put the phone on the modem, and it took for one Word file. It took all evening watching this I go back every half hour or so to see how much the blue bar moved across and she read it the next day, called me up and said, I can sell this book, please sign with me. I'm like thinking, then I went back to the list to make sure she was legit. So I'm thinking, anyways, she really loved it. And sure enough, within 6 weeks, she signed a contract with Revell, which I didn't know was a very big publisher. It was one of the, Baker Books, one of the top 5 publishers. But for me, I'm just glad that somebody's going to handle this, because I don't have the time. Well, then I didn't know this, but this book was just making its way through Revell. Everybody was passing it around. And when it got published, it wound up winning 2 Carol Awards its first time out. And that kind of launched things with me and the publisher. But after that, they're literally like pursuing me for more. And I'm like, I honestly didn't have any other, that was my book. The well's dry already. I'm a pastor, that's my world. This was something to help me relax so I didn't burn out. It wasn't like this was going to be my second career. But anyways, the nice thing about being accepted by a publisher like that was they did everything. I didn't have to concern myself with anything but writing. And so I did, my wife and I banged our heads and we came up with a sequel idea for the first book. I pitched it to them, they bought it. I went ahead and started writing. And it was like a book, back then I could do one book a year, it was part-time. And when that finished, I think by the time that came out, the Carol Awards happened with the first one. Now they're begging me for a third. And I'm like, I got nothing. Even I would never imagined I would have 25 books later, in my mind. It was a fantasy. But the point I'm making is, back then, that world of traditional publishing, the only way to see your books in someone's hands was the route I took. Right. There was no alternative method for the indie publishing idea was not even thought of as a possibility. Then just show you how radical this is. That was 2000. By the time my first book hit the shelves of 2009, it won the Carols in 2010 when my second book came out. And 5 years later, I'm leaving traditional publishing to become an indie because it's the better choice. Yeah. That's how quickly things changed. What happened, I really think the year was 2012. I can almost mark it when it all hit the fan, so to speak. That year, my book, The Reunion, which we're talking about, this one being made into a movie, had come out at Christmas era in the fall. And they were real excited about it. They couldn't wait for it to release it based on their own reactions and stuff. But they printed up like 30, 40,000 copies, assuming it was going to be just lapped right up like people waiting for it. And it fell short by about half. But it wasn't just my book. Everybody's book that year fell short by half because Amazon came out with a Kindle for $99 for Christmas. And it was the #1 Christmas present in 2012 was the Kindle, $99. And within a year, they came out with the app, where the free app to any device, that, of course, then everyone wasn't doing phones yet. They had started to have tablets, but any device could have a Kindle app for free. And you could have Kindle even if you didn't buy a Kindle. That was, I think that was when the ship hit the iceberg, if you ask me. It didn't sink in 3 hours. It took 3 years, but that was like the death knell. And then I think the following year they came out with, okay, we'll make Prime. And so even print books will be free shipping. You want free shipping? 2 days, you get any book you want in 2 days. You couldn't get that from the bookstore. So now they just, now they're cutting in even deeper to the bookstores. Well, around that time is when, sadly, a lot of the smaller publishing houses, not just Christian in publishing in general, started going belly up. They just couldn't keep up with that surge. The losses they took, the bigger stores could weather it. But they had boxes and boxes of books in their warehouses. Good news was the sales of that book Reunion, for me, were just as good. But now instead of being 3%, it was almost 50-50 in 1 year, from print being almost 97 to now 50-50. And I was thankfully doing it. At that time, I think I got the Gary Smalley contract. And I had just signed another 3-book contract with them. So I was you could say, sitting pretty for another 3 years as far as contracts. But while I was publishing and writing those books in that 3-year period leading up to 2015, it just got worse and worse for publishing. The indie phenomena, you could say, really started to take hold. And it happened because all of these smaller houses were basically dumping their authors because they couldn't keep them. These authors, in turn, there wasn't enough room on the big houses to take them all. So by virtue of you could say, necessity, they sought out the indie, and they're the ones that, with me, the pioneers of this thing. They started carving out this indie path that really wasn't there before. But Amazon also basically offered to whosoever will, you can publish with us, skip the middleman, these big, mean publishing guys, standing in your way. Just come to us. It'll just be you and us, 70-30, and you'll get 70 and we'll get 30. That was shocking numbers. 70-30 is shocking numbers. Give you an example. When I was with Ravel, I gotta admit, it's really way cool to see your books in Barnes and Noble on the tables and have pictures and that was way cool. But what nobody was talking about was, for that $10 book on sale at Barnes and Noble, I got $1. $9 went to other people. And even though I was getting large advances for what I found out to be were for the time, it was enough. They offered me after the third book to go full time. I said, I'm going to need at least 2 books a year because I can't afford what you're paying me on one. They said, well, we'll do 2 books a year then. And that at least matched my pastor's salary, the advances. So I made the leap. But in that, like I said, in that 3-year period when I'm writing these books, I'm just watching this kind of crumbling effect. And I've seen one after the other, my friends that I had been working with being dropped by the publishers when their contract time came up. They were only keeping, you could say, the top tier people in terms of sales. What used to be enough sales to get re-signed were not enough anymore, and people were being dropped. And those people started going Indy. Because again, Amazon had this offer. And what I started to find out in those last couple of years, more and more as I would start to speak and teach again, but at that time I was being invited to speak at conferences, never Zoom, always in person. But I started asking people at the end, hey, question, how many of you have started buying your books online? And, there'd be like, almost like you're asking people, about their secret sins. These hands would start going up. And next thing I know is like 3 out of 4 hands going up. And then everybody was saying, but I really wish I could buy print. I just can't afford it. Because and some of the elderly, of course, they love the Kindle. We just tap the button and make the print bigger, stuff like that. I was like, and I thought, okay. And I think by 2014, when I'd asked that question, almost all the hands were going up. And I'd noticed when I'd go into the bookstore, because I would always go to the bookstore and check out my books. Just a little bit of vanity there. I go to City and I go in the bookstore and Cindy's, let's go see your books. And I go in the book and there they were. But we're starting to notice we're the only ones in the bookstore. Certainly the only ones in the Christian fiction aisle. And I thought, and then this isn't good. So her and I started talking and praying about whether or not I needed to really seriously consider when the next time contract time came up to make that leap into doing it myself. And like I said, by that time, James Scott Bell and Brandon Collins had made that leap, and they had been doing it for over a year. And they interacted with me basically saying, you could make a killing at this if you just get the courage to do it. And I was pretty nervous, to be honest with you. We talked about what I actually did was that last year, we tried to live on about half of what we were living on, preparing ourselves for me to make the leap and just not, and even saying I might have to go back to working full-time or part-time until I get, because once I left for Bell, all my books were with them. I had no rights. The royalties amounts, because you have to, you guys know how traditional works. You don't get paid anything until your advance earns out. Well, my advances were earning out, but the income from the books that I had, when I look at the royalty statements, it's fair to say I was living off the advances, not the royalties. The advances being completely gone, when I knew they would be when I made it, I'm like, I don't know if I can make it. So she went to work. We were like, okay, we're bracing out. We took the hit. Well, we had 1 year after I made the leap, 2015, I made half that year what I was making. Her income made the difference to keep us afloat. But being honest, by the second year, I had 3 books out. Just with 3 books out and the little bit of royalties I was getting from Bell, I was back up to the salary I was the year before. And now the difference is, I didn't mention this part, the thing that caused me to make the leap, and I think it was just the Lord kind of pushing me, saying, do it. They asked me to submit what I was going to want them to go for next. And I made a proposal for a suspense series. And I had not written any suspense books, and a dog series, rescue dog series. And they turned them both down. They had never turned me down, ever. First time ever, they turned me down and said, well, for the suspense books, we love the stories, but you're not a suspense author, and people, your brand is this. You're the Nicholas Sparks of Christian fiction. No one wants to read you writing suspense. That was kind of I'm like, okay, I don't think I agree with that. But dog books, we don't think dog books aren't trending right now. We're not sure. What else you got? So my wife and I prayed, and we thought, that's it. I really wanted to write these books. So my first book out of the gate was When Night Comes, a suspense novel, totally unlike anything I'd written. And everyone was telling me, this is suicide. No one's going to buy this, because they're like, they have other people they like for suspense, and it's not you. And then the second book I wrote was Rescuing Finley. Well, let's put it this way, they were wrong. I would say probably, judging by the sales of those 2 books in the first year, about half of my readers that only had read my other books took a try on the suspense novel and loved it. And enough so that I was clearly green lighted to it wasn't like I had to get permission. Now I could just, what do I want to do? And what am I praying about? We wrote the second book, the third, well, give me, fast forwarding the story. I've finished that first book, a 4-book series, a suspense series, wrote an additional 3 books for a sisters or sequel series, and have more books coming, 7 books like that. And then the dog series, which they turned down, said no one wants to read it. That's been my best-selling book of all time. I don't even tell you how much money I've made off that book and how much money they lost. Rescuing Finley has, I think, something like over 1,500 5-star reviews on Amazon. It's like, and every month I get this big check from Amazon for rescue, not just Rescuing Finley. Everybody reads Rescuing Finley, and then they read Finding Riley, Saving Parker, and now Keeping Bailey. I just released the 4th one last year, and I wasn't even gonna I thought there was a trilogy. But the sales were so good, and everybody's like, you've got to have more books. And my wife and I are like, what else? And I thought, I really think there's a story about old dogs I want to write. And we talked about it and talked about it. And I came up with a story. And last year I wrote Keeping Bailey. Bailey's actually our dog's name, and she's almost 15, has doggy dementia. That's another story. But I was talking about that. The theme of it is like, it's not the dog dies. This is not a dog dies. It's about caring for your dogs as they age. Kind of, if you say if there's a theme. And I was really nervous about it. I'm thinking, the other 3 books are doing so well. Is this going to be the book that sinks it? Like, this is going to be the bridge too far. It's just the opposite. Keeping Bailey's almost got 900 something reviews right now in 1 year. I've never had a book get that reaction from readers. And it's like almost all 5 stars. People are loving it. Now they're saying, when's the next book? I'm like, I don't, I'm just saying just how wrong the traditional publishers were. The series that have, in a sense, been my bread and butter this last several years, my income has way exceeded anything I ever got from Revell, and that's this movie thing is just starting to happen, which is another whole branch of possibilities, especially considering who's doing it. It's the guy who won the Oscar for Green Book is making it. He's right now, for those who are curious, he's having a hard time getting funding because the investors are not sure people are going to go back to the movies for movies like that. Like Green Book was just the year before COVID, and it did huge success. Made $235 million on a $23 million budget. It was a huge success, and he wants to make it like that. The problem is investors like, well, we're seeing people go to the things for the Marvel movies, but we're not seeing the dramas getting that kind of reaction. They're urging him to make like what we call streaming. Like Hulu or Prime, whatever. So he's like, it's going to get made one way or another this year. He's promising me that. We'll see. But that, like I said, that could change things dramatically for me in terms of the audience reach that I have now versus then. But going back though, we're only talking 2015. This is 2022, beginning of it. And in 2015, I barely made it. But again, I think by 2017, I was equaling or surpassing Revell, and every year after that, I've been way past what I was making in traditional world. That's largely because I would say 2 things happen. The 70-30 thing has stayed with Amazon. They've stayed true to that. And I started, and now we're going to get into the reality of how do you make it work in Indy. Because I realize, and as people have asked me this, and I realize it's kind of a little unfair for me to be the one sort of teaching on this, because not everybody gets to have that 13-book head start with a big publisher. And that's true. But on the other hand, I had to start from scratch. I had no help. I went from being a kept man who did nothing but, their whole thing to me was, what do you want me to do as far as marketing? Just keep writing great books. That was it. I'd respond to phone calls from the publicists and the marketing people. You got a phone call in Chicago, a radio interview, blah, blah, blah. I did nothing for marketing. Now, all of a sudden, I got no help and I'm just floating on my own. The good news was for me, prior to doing this, I had been a pastor of a small church. And in a sense, it was, I say small, it was like 300 people. It's not like tiny, but it was still a smallish church. Wear a lot of hats for the church that size. And I was also the CEO, you could say, of a mid-sized nonprofit corporation. I was very involved in a lot of business stuff. I was definitely involved in, we didn't have the money to make all the brochures and all that. So I got involved in learning how to do all that stuff. So once I became an Indy, I was hiring out everything initially. Those first few books, I had to hire out for everything, and it cost more money to produce the book. But I kind of decided, since I was full-time, I can learn this. I realized after succeeding at this, not everyone, talking with a lot of people in a lot of conferences, not all the writers have the aptitude for that, and that would scare them to death, the thought of having to do all of that. I would say there's probably, once you finish your book and have it ready to go, there's probably like 8 to 10 significant tasks to make it ready for people to buy on Amazon or store. Who does those 8 to 10 tasks is the question. Can you do those things? Or do you need to hire out others to those things? Or is it too overwhelming to you and you want to go to it where they've got like a small indie house? Because that's one thing is also newish. In the aftermath of all of these big companies going downsizing and going belly up, a whole market industry have come up. Small, they call them indie presses. They're not traditional in the sense that there's no advance. They don't have a marketing budget. That's pretty big, both those things. But what they can do is they'll go to writers and say, we'll do those 10 tasks that you don't feel equipped to do for you, for this kind, and they'll have a contract, and they'll basically be your publisher. And they're basically, what they're saying is, you write the books and we'll help you get it ready to market. And that's one option for indies to go. I kind of chose the option that I want to be in control of this thing. I know what it's like to not have control, and I don't like it. And it took me years. I just about last year got the rights back to all those Revell books. And they sat there earning nothing for Revell, just sitting there, and I didn't have the rights, couldn't do anything with them. Finally, they earned so low over a year that by contract, they had to give me the rights back, and they did. I turned them all that year into second editions for me, and they're just going, woo! All my indie people, because one thing, they were priced out of reach. I made them all, but priced with my indies. I did all the, and they've just, taken off wonderfully. All these, these readers that I now have developed with the indie thing have gone back, and now they're discovering my Revell book. So that's been kind of fun. But anyways, that's kind of the big picture. Now I'm in the, I guess you say, the rhythm of writing about 2 books a year. My wife and I, you could say, are in control of which books I write and how I'm spending my time. And I'm really loving it. Those 10 tasks, I do them all now myself. I one by one, I learned how to do them, so I wouldn't have to pay people to do them. I could keep more for us. But yeah, so I realize that's not everybody's story. That's the chance to do all that. There's going to be, and so in some ways, I guess when I talk to this, I always want to be careful to adjust expectations. Because I think a lot of people who've gotten into the indie world have been disappointed by the results, have not seen the sales or anything like the growth that they hoped or expected to find. I have done a lot of analysis and interviewing people. I think I have some understanding as to why, but I'll stop now so I don't use up all the rest of the time telling my story. Just kind of shift to see if any of you guys just want to have any specific questions about what you've heard or anything that you have on your own about this.
People are wanting to know those 10 tasks. The list. Yeah, I assume like it would be the formatting, the cover, or you're talking about those kinds of things.
Yeah, the formatting, the cover, the copy for what's going to be on either the cover or the information you're going to have online. Obviously, editing, editing, proofreading. Then you also have, there's how to market the back pages. The back pages are kind of critical, especially with online ebook buys. And then you're looking at the idea of when you were talking about the marketing. All right, which direction do I go? Amazon, there's a thing called Amazon being exclusive with Amazon, or do I quote go wide? There's a lot of ins and outs about that have to be evaluated. And I think too, again, I think probably of those tasks, the last 2 or 3 have to do with marketing things more than getting the book ready. But you have to kind of make some of these decisions in advance as you release the book, because once you release the book, you're kind of stuck for a while. And so, anyways, I have a workshop that I created for that, kind of laying out from once you have the book manuscript ready, what's the process from that to hopefully people buying your book online. But like I said, I learned that I didn't, when I started off, it was all big. It was just like, I opened up a hallway and there's a bunch of, a long hallway with a bunch of doors, and I hadn't opened up any of them. Everything I was, like I said, kept man. I went from that to now I feel like I can do all of those, not in my sleep, but almost. The last 4 or 5 books, I'm able to do all those tasks without any stress at all. Even the covers. I've been doing all my covers since the first 2.
Wow. Wow. That's great. Do you edit though, or do you have someone else do editing, or at least beta read?
I have a unique, and it really is a unique editing situation. And I have to, when I teach on this, I have to explain to people, because what I'm doing, I don't recommend, because unless you had my wife in your life, you can't do what I'm doing. But my wife, turns out, is an A-list editor.
Wow.
I was with Revell, and the reason that she's got so involved was I realized early on, being a male author in a majorly female-dominated fiction is like 80-20 female, maybe even 90-10, but certainly 80-20. And all the women I dealt with in the business side of it were all women, except the guys that owned the company. I never saw them. So I realized, if I'm going to make a go of this, all of my wife has to be helping me with all the female characters. And we had a good relationship. We did a lot of marriage counseling together and stuff like that. I mean, we were married by the time I wrote my first book. We were married like 35 years, I think, or so. So I basically read every chapter to her after I finished it. And she's kind of like my biggest fan, but she's also, no one loves me more, and she's my biggest critic.
Right.
And especially with the women. Early on, she was like, Dan, a woman would never say that. And she's not thinking that. She would never do that. And I learned early on, if she says anything like that, I change it. And so when I sent that first book, Unfinished Gift, to Revell, it was 97. What people read in the book is 97% what I sent them the first time. They were shocked when they sent me back the fixes letter. It was a 1 email with 3 paragraphs that took me like an afternoon to fix. It had to do with stuff like Santa and whether we could have Santa or not, things like that. It wasn't even anything substantial. And then each of the books, that was the case. By the 3rd book, Deepest Waters, my editor, and now we're winning Carol Awards, and my editor was like, I almost feel like I was guilty getting this award, because you're sending me books that are almost ready to go. I have so little that I have to do. How do you do that? Because they usually allow 6 weeks for rewrites. And I said to her, I told her about my wife. And then we went to the conference. We want to meet her. And so the next conference, we brought her with me, and they're meeting her. They literally offered her a job.
Wow.
They said, it would be for like acquisitions. There's the one who evaluates the quality of characters and storylines, not for proofreading and typos. But she's like, no, I don't want to do that. I don't want to do that. I just like doing this for Dan. But so that's what's happened. And here's the funny thing. After I left Revell, I've been using her ever since as my primary editor, and my books are still getting 5-star reviews and still getting awards. And it's like, we didn't skip a beat. Why? Because Cindy's my editor. So if you have a Cindy in your life, that's all. And you don't, what I have to pay her, I have to take her out to a really nice restaurant, and I give her a few $100 to get some nice stuff. But really, just seriously, for most people, for 99.9% of indies, you really have to seriously hire a good editor. Would be the very most important thing I could say after you finish your manuscript, is you need to, and that's one tragic situation I've observed. I did a survey in one of my last classes of how many people, indies, skip that step, and 4 out of 5 skip it. And then they're bemoaning why their books aren't selling and they're not getting good reviews. And I'm like, do you understand that if this was back 10 years ago, you would have been rejected. You would have never even gotten in the door, because they would have rejected the quality of your work. And what that did for the writers back then was all those rejections forced them to hone their craft and to bring their craft up to a point where they would be accepted in that exclusive club. Well, now Amazon doesn't have that. They're like, hey, anybody who wants to publish, come on. We'll publish your book, and we'll let the readers decide if it's any good. Well, that's not. So what I think happens is, most of the indies that have gone self-published are publishing works that I think would have been rejected by the old system, because they've skipped all these steps up front that require a quality manuscript, because they don't know what's missing. And the people they're getting to look at it aren't probably have the skills to see it all. And are also probably, depending on someone's level of timidity, like some people, you start to correct their work and they start to cry. They're fishing for compliments. They're hoping there's maybe one or two things. And I've read things by people who've sent them to me. I'm like, this is a literal mess. Where do I start? And I'm thinking, how do I tell this person how much work they need to get this thing ready? Because I know what it needs to be like to actually be successful. And it's so far from it. And they're thinking, I'm ready to go to Amazon. So the editing thing to me is the one big missing link to why indies, I think, aren't successful, is they skip that and don't skip that. It can be expensive. And finding the best editor for you might be a bit of a journey in itself. But if you want to be successful at this, you need to embrace that.
All right. What other questions did we have? I've not actually seen all the chat as it's gone by.
I had one. What were the first things you needed to learn while embarking on indie publishing?
Well, first of all, for me was understanding the process. I went online to find out everything I could learn about the process and what these steps were to be, and essentially what I was learning was these are the things that my publishing team did once I turned the book over to them. And obviously those tasks now have to be done by somebody. If they're you can, the choices you make there are like I chose, because I feel I have something of an entrepreneurial bent because of my experience before. I felt like I want to be in control of this process. And I feel like I have the confidence to be like if it's like a house, I'm going to be the guy who's building my own house, and I'm going to be in charge of the contractors, but they're going to actually be the experts doing the work. So initially I was hiring out people until I started. And as I was hiring out for those books, I was learning how to do the things that cost me the most money. Because I thought, if I can do these myself by the next book, I save that much more money up front. And by I think the third or fourth book, I had basically learned everything I needed to know. The question you have to ask yourself is, what kind of person am I? What's my ambition? What's my aptitude for that stuff? And if you don't feel honestly that you can do all those things, you're just not wired that way, then you need to really be looking at finding the best small independent publisher to go with. Or knowing that in doing that, it's not financially going to be that successful because you're going to be splitting at least. You're not going to have an advance for one thing, and they don't have generally a marketing budget to give you. But what you're talking about is somebody who's willing to take that book and take your manuscript and turn it into something that's ready to download on Amazon or wherever, if you go wide, other online stores. That's the choice up front you need to make. Am I the person who can do this, or do I need to accept that that's not me? And if that's the case, then writing might be just a passion that you make some income from, but realistically, you're going to have to give a lot of the whatever income is generated, share it with other people who are actually doing the work to make your book happen.
Yeah. Do you feel people needed to know your name before you started self-publishing?
It helps. But what I'd say by that is I've because of the first time I was asked to speak on indie publishing, knowing that most of the people I would talk to did not have my story. And I felt like after I told my story, I'd lose half or 3/4 of the audience. Well, that's not me. The chances of me ever being in him is forget about it. So what I did was along the way, I'd met online about half dozen very successful indie authors who were making way more than I was. And their big regret in life is they were never accepted by the mainstream publishers. All their books were rejected and they never made the cut, so to speak. But they got in on the indie thing at the beginning, like 2012, 2013, and they kept writing and producing books. And by the time I got to meet them in 2016, say, these are people making, I won't tell you the names, but they were making 80 to 100,000 a year. And yet they had not had a single award to their name. They were not part of the traditional world. One was making like 150 a year. And if you talk to them, the big regret in their life was that they were always, they said this kind of sentence of rejection on them because they never were accepted by the traditional club. And I couldn't come to them and they welcomed me with open arms. They're gracious as could be. But I always want to kind of tell them, ladies, you don't understand. You are successful. You need to reject this sentence, this brand you put on yourself. The readers have validated you. Forget about these editors and publishers rejecting you. The readership you've grown has created for you this income. People don't buy things and keep buying things they don't like. So I asked them before I was teaching my first conference on Indy stuff. I said, I'm going to need to interview you guys because people are going to want to know how to do this. And they're going to be turned off by the fact that they see I had this huge audience before I started. The one thing I can tell you that they told me, and I think this is a valid answer to your question, is they all had to keep their day job until they had, on average, 8 to 10 novels published, self-published, which they equated to 2 complete series. They always said you have to write in series. So we had like a 4-book is preferred. So when I had by my second 4-book series, I was making enough to quit my day job. And then they were making substantially more than that beyond that. Because what happens is the reader, and again, these are people I would say honed their skills. They should have been accepted. The fact that they weren't is the flaws of the traditional publishing world. These were people who were successful because they're good writers. They honed their craft, and so people would read book 1, they'd love it. On the back of the book, you want to read more, click here. They'd read book 2 and pay for it. Book 3, they read it, pay for it. And they go through their books, and then you find there's another series. And in book 4, you want to like this, read book, this new series. They click on that, and they're just going through it. No advertising, just the quality of the writing and the availability of it at the back of the book caused their sales to just continue to skyrocket. But they said that they realized, though, most of the writers lose heart after the first or second book because their sales are so poor. Maybe get 3 books and it's just not working. Then they realized that that we're going to have to keep at this because they saw the income increasing with each book, but they said on average 8 to 10 books. Well, here's the thing: by the time I started, I had 12. It just so happens they were all a traditional publisher. They got their 8 to 10 books. And so they didn't have a name before they got successful enough to earn that kind of income. But it came through a different path, a much harder path. But it was more legitimate. If you say, how do you make it as an indie? Their story, I think, is more repeatable. My story, who's going to, you can't go back in time and recreate what happened. It's a unique thing, but I do believe it's possible for people to make it as an indie, but you have to start with a book that is killer. The writing has to be killer. I've seen too many indies focus way too much on the 10 steps, and they don't really realize, is this book the kind of book that people can't stop reading once they start? And when they put it down, they're like, I want to read the next book. If that's where to put the effort there, if that's before you start worrying about all these marketing and hats thing, is really hone the craft of whatever you're writing, so that people, once they start reading, they just can't stop.
You talked about writing in series. Do you think the same thing would be for a children's chapter book?
See, it's like a different animal. I think probably, if I'm only guessing because I'm a grandfather now and I have no experience in children's books, and I read children's books. We read children's books to our kids, and we now read them to our grandkids. And I know moms do most of the buying, not granddads. We might do some reading, but we don't do the buying. I think for them, it's more if the book is really captures their kids, and that of course involves the graphics as well, the artwork, not just the writing. But the combination of that, if that's a book that their kids love, want to keep reading it, I'm sure there would be that, there'd be more, I think, in that case, more the idea of the author, who they look for, than if there's a series. The thing I said was more about, I think, whether it's a young adult or adult fiction. Children's books, I think, is probably, my guess would be it has more to do with the quality of the book. And they would probably, like my wife would probably go for an author, because the last couple of books of that author were so enjoyable. The author, like they had authors send them an email saying, I'm coming out with a new book. They'd buy it because they had such a good experience.
Thank you.
Do you think it's better to go exclusive with Amazon or go wide with your book?
Exclusive with Amazon,
How come?
100%. In a word, income. Again, I have, you could put it this way, I hate that it's this way. Hate that it's this way. I especially hated it during the election. because the way of how the big tech was clearly trying to skew the election results, including Amazon. But here's the problem. There's no serious competitor for Amazon online. And as much as I've talked to so many authors now who've tried both ways, my income with Amazon came out with, you know how innovative they are. First of all, Amazon is super easy for the reader to access. It's super easy and it's very inexpensive for the reader. Like I say, first of all, who can't swipe and who can't click on a thing and the book comes from out of nowhere into your device or app or phone in 30 seconds. And sometimes you find out there's deals you can get for $2.99, $3.99 for a book that's probably should have been $10. And Amazon is for the authors, the 70-30 deal. So for me, when I was looking at it, first off, I tried both. I tried the wide first, and this was back in 2015. Then after that, I did it for like 3 months. Then I signed on for Amazon for 3 months and compared the two. It was even then, night and day, the Amazon income was double what I was getting wide. And instead of all this work I was having to do with all these houses, I just go to one dashboard and there it all is, and it's double. Yeah. So here's the thing though, since then, Amazon came out with Kindle Unlimited.
Mhm.
You all know what Kindle Unlimited is, nod your head if you know. Kindle Unlimited, I knew a lot of people like, I'm not going to do that. That's just giving your book away. And here's my thought was, all right, I know all these seniors on fixed incomes. If I was a senior reading, I loved reading, and I had an offer for $10 a month, I could read all the Kindle books I could read. Yeah, I'm doing that. And if I find book, and I'm only doing that, why would I spend even $4 or $5 for a book? Because I can read 2 books. I can read a senior who's retired who loves to read can read a couple 3 books a week. Maybe up to $50 a month versus $10 a month. So I'm thinking, plus, if they're doing that, then they're not buying my books. So the audience that's on Kindle Unlimited is not the same audience that's buying ebooks and print books. So I thought, I'm going to take a chance and sign up for that. Well, here we are now. Kindle Unlimited, my income per month is probably approaching 2/3 of my income. My Kindle sales and my print books is the other third. When I started, it was the opposite. That's how many more people now are on Kindle Unlimited because they've discovered it. And there's also literally millions of books available on Kindle Unlimited. When it first started off, it was like a lot of people were testing it, but now it's just like so many are available. So for the reader, it's a great deal. And what I wind up getting is, for my books are about average, say 300 pages, say for a novel, I get around $2 a book. That's less than what I would get if they bought the book at a Kindle. But then again, they're not the ones that are going to buy the book on Kindle. It's not the same person. The person who's going to buy the Kindle Unlimited is not even going to shop for the book at a Kindle price. So I'm getting both groups now by doing Kindle Unlimited, but the amount of the volume has just quadrupled in the last 3 years. I just, to me, I don't know how wide could even, and I've talked with a lot of my author friends. Most of them, when I first did this, and I told them the reason I'm doing it is this, I feel like a sellout. I feel like, well, what about the little guy? And I'm like, yeah, here's the problem is I'm the little guy. It's me and my wife. We're trying to make a go of it. We're trying to survive. And this monster called Amazon has been very, very good to me. It's like, as much as I want to say, you monster, you savage beast, you're just gobbling up everything on the landscape. It's like, yeah, but then again, I'm paying my bills and having some left over. And now we're actually taking vacations. And now I'm, and
Yeah.
how do you, I wish I didn't have to be that guy, but
But do you ever get concerned that you're putting all your eggs in one basket?
No, because let's put it this way. If I went the other way, seriously, my income would drop by half to starters. That would be imagine whatever your pay is per month, imagine it being cut in half and that being a good thing for some principle's sake. I'd have to have a lot more than, now here's the thing, here's what's gonna happen. A meteor could come crashing through our atmosphere and collide, like the movie Gravity, into all these satellites. And then people can't buy online anymore. But when that happens, I figure the whole world's hit the fan, and it's not just the book world.
Yeah.
So, or World War III could happen. I mean, when you talk about what would have to happen for that to be the catastrophic collapse, even if they broke up Amazon in a monopoly type situation, the book thing would still be intact. They would just, Amazon would have to maybe be broken up in a couple of companies, but one of them would still be doing all the books. So I just look at it and think, yeah, I don't see in my mind, I'm 65, Lord knows the future. I don't know. I'm like that, one of my verses in James, come now you who say in James 3, this year we'll go into such and such city, engage in business, making profit. Who are you, oh man, you don't know a day or what you should say is, if the Lord wills, we'll be alive and also do this or that. That's how I operate. I'm like, Lord, you know the future. That's too big for me. All I know is I've been asking for guidance, and the Lord knows I want to be a good steward. I wish I wasn't doing so much business with Rome, but I am. And I don't have any other alternatives at this point I can see.
I'm going to ask everyone to come back on. And while they're doing that, I've got a question for you about marketing, because we all know, most of us as writers, we don't really want to do the marketing. And you were talking about with Ravel, you didn't have to do the marketing. So what is like the one marketing thing? If you're going to go indie, what would your one big marketing advice be? Because we know we have to do it as an indie author.
Assuming that you've accepted that because my first big secret of marketing in my workshops is I unveil it, I kind of build it up, and then I unveil it on the next slide. And my biggest tip is write a great book.
Okay.
And everybody's like, because I got to be honest. And I asked what do you do as a reader? You read a book that you can't stop reading. You're looking forward to the next time, and when it's over, you loved it. What's your reaction? Does this author have any more books? I've got to find out. And if you meet a friend that loves fiction, and you're in social media, you're like, you got to read this book. That is marketing, the best kind. It didn't cost you a dime. So the second thing I do is, which also doesn't cost a dime, is learn how to market the back pages. Because you have this window, if you have written a great book, which is step one, when they finish, you have a window, maybe 15, 20 minutes, probably. There's like an afterglow. If you can capture that reader in that afterglow to look at your books, nobody else's, look at your books next, they're going to buy. If you go on my books and look on Amazon and you see what readers who bought this also bought, go along the bottom, you're going to see all of my books. Because every one of my books at the end, the very first page after the end is, want to read more? And I sell the next book that they should buy. Or if it's a second book in a series, the next book, I tell them all. And then I have another page where if you like that book, here's links to other books. It doesn't cost me anything. The second thing I do, the next thing is, do you want to help this author? And I basically play the violin, asking them to leave a review and make a link for them to leave a review. I would say marketing the back pages is the second thing, because again, it doesn't cost anything. The other thing, I mean, yes, there's Facebook ads, there's all different kinds of ads and marketing. Those things need to be explored. But I think if you can maybe look at those first two, and then the idea of, I got to keep writing some more books. I need to get enough books as far as my expectation. Because what happens if the reader, they love your book and they check and you haven't written anymore? Well, they go elsewhere. And hopefully I would market my newsletter right off the bat, because then maybe I can connect with them so that I can tell them when the next book comes out. But the idea of getting them hooked onto your readership is, so there's also one of those other lists I mentioned is having an author website, a decent author website that you can refer them to. That's where you can hook them in with a mailing list. So you can interact with them more, effectively. Because social media, you guys know this, social media, you might have friends and likes, whatever, but they're scrolling, and it's up to Facebook or whoever to decide if anybody sees you.
Right.
They think when they like I have 4,000 plus likes on my page. I've stopped even bothering with it, because it costs me like $200-300 to send a post that they'll all see. They think when they're liking my page that they're going to now start getting me in their feed. No, I look on average, and maybe 150 people see what I post on Facebook on my business page. So I just pay all my attention on my profile page. But as far as the idea of that social media, the other options are advertising through things like Amazon ads, Facebook ads, or the king of kings in marketing is BookBub.
Mhm.
BookBub is number one, and there's nobody in the first 8 slots. They're the best marketing. And again, you're going to hate me for saying this, but when I started off, I realized that the first time BookBub said yes to my marketing pitch for a book, the results were astronomical by comparison to all the hard work of all the other things combined I was doing.
Mm.
So I decided, job one, get BookBub to say yes. What do I need to do to get BookBub to say yes? And I just started reading everything I could on how to get BookBub to say yes. BookBub says yes to me all the time now, every time. I know this last time I just submitted one, and by the end of the day, they came back to me and said, "Congratulations, you're on." Well, it doesn't hurt now that I have 15,000 BookBub followers and all of this stuff that, history with them, where every time I do a download, there's 35, 40,000 downloads. When I started off, though, that wasn't the case. I was like anybody else, just trying to find my way. But I would say that would be where I would put if I was going to spend money. BookBub is the best thing out there as far as reaching people and connecting with readers. I tried Facebook ads. I took a whole course, spent a couple $100 to learn how to do it. You actually had to take a course to learn how to do it. It was so complex, and it was lots of work, and it cost lots of money. And when I did the first BookBub thing, I made way more than I ever made all 2 months of Facebook. So that's why I kind of thought, okay, I don't know if I have the energy to do this whole ad world thing. And I just started doing the things I'm telling you, and kept writing books. Because I realized that every time I wrote a book, now I had 2,000 to 3,000 people on my mailing list, I'd get an instant surge. All those people would go out and buy it. And a whole bunch more would discover me along the way. And eventually I kind of focus more on that than the marketing, the ads, a little more legwork than paid. So I'm not an expert on things like Facebook ads or Amazon ads. And I know a lot of writers have made, a good deal of money doing that. I can't really advise to that because I didn't go that path.
Well, that's great. That's great advice. Thank you. Does anyone else have any questions? We've got about 2 or 3 more minutes.
I will say it sounds like it's almost a good idea to have 2 books ready to go when you first start out. That way you can link to your second book in the back pages of your first book.
I've had some authors, on your point, to confirm your point, I've had some authors tell me they didn't actually launch their first book till they had the series done, because it wasn't their income source. And when they understood the reasoning of it, they realized I need momentum. And there's no momentum, because if I get them all excited about a book and I can tell them, come back in 6 months, I'll have another one. Yeah. Well, so much life happens. Who knows if you can reconnect in 6 months? But if you get 4 books in a row, at some point at that point, if all 4 books are up to par, there's a good chance they're going to sign up for your newsletter. And once they're on your newsletter, you have access to them for all the rest of the books.
No. I just think this has been so wonderful, and appreciate you sharing your story. I kind of want to go back to Cindy, though, because I remember you and Cindy standing outside of a American Christian Fiction Writers Florida chapter meeting.
Yeah, I remember.
The first time I met you and met Cindy. And Cindy trains dogs, so that's part of what your whole love for.
Oh, the dog series would not have happened without her. I would not even have thought it possible for me to write. I love dogs. We both have loved dogs we're married 45 years. We got a dog at 6 weeks. We haven't been without at least one, often 2 or 3 since then. But loving dogs is not the same as knowing what to do with them.
Yeah.
Cindy became literally a master trainer. She's as good as the people on TV show and YouTube. She's trained over 1,000 dogs. She's retired now for the last 2 years doing it. Sadly, because especially the bigger dogs, before she takes the dog and trains it, they're a mess. And so it's kind of like a young woman's game, because she's starting to have hip problems. Every time she get done training, after a while, she'd be like all sore, and we go to the chiropractor. And finally, I kind of said, "Hun, she's 67 now." I said, we got to be honest, we don't need you to do this anymore. Thank God, the money's there with the books. You can retire. You can talk about guilt just, after doing that. And of course she loves dogs. But yeah, the books would not have happened. She's all over those books. And she would accept that in my last couple of books, I know more now because of all of her help. So when I'm writing, what I give to her is not as messed up as it used to be. It used to be like I would take my stab at the chapter and she'd read it. I literally sometimes she'd laugh out loud reading what I wrote, like how far off I was from what the character would say. But yeah.
That is a great series. I'd like more.
Well, I'd be an idiot not to keep writing them. I mean, the only thing is I now, again, keeping Bailey, when I wrote it, I thought that to me was something of an experiment. I hoped it wouldn't fail. It turned out it was a crazy good experiment. But I need a story that has the same level of grip that those stories have. And I'm praying and hoping I get one. I don't think there's only 4 good dog stories in the world.
No.
There's a movie out now about a dog that we saw a preview of, about a military guy takes on a dog, and that looks great. That movie, I don't know if it is great, but I mean, yeah, Lord willing, there's another dog story coming. If I get one, I'm definitely going to go for it.
I think that one's called Dog, isn't it? Isn't that the name of the?
Well, I think there's another one just out now with Channing Tatum.
Yeah, that's the one. I think it's just called Dog.
Yeah, I think it's just called Dog, and it's a comedy. But we were watching something in the movie theater. We actually went to the movie theater a few weeks ago, and I was playing, and we were laughing out loud, like, "Oh my gosh!" I hope not all the funny parts of we've just seen them, but it looked like a really good movie. But like again, people love dogs. How just a little thought? How far off was my publisher saying no?
Yeah.
I mean, it's a little bit of a kind of a cautionary tale. How many times people rejected? All those authors I told you succeeded big time as indies were rejected always by traditional. Every one of those traditional editors messed up by saying no to those ladies.
Right.
Yeah.
Every one of them has made a killing. Good news for them, they made the money 70-30. It didn't all go to the publishers, and they would have had the pat on the back that I was, quote, in the club. I look back now, I'm not at all ashamed of my publishing experience before. I thank God for it. I treasure it. But to be honest with you, what I learned afterwards, yeah, I'm going to say it because it's being recorded. People have asked me, my only regret is I didn't become an indie sooner, if I'm being honest.
Yeah. It's interesting too that they were talking about 8 to 10, and then they sort of had their overnight success, because that's true for traditional published authors often too. If they write 5, 6, 7 books before they get published, so there is that.
Yeah, and they hated me when I heard my story. Here I wrote this book, pastor. I haven't even tried. I'm in the first critique group. I had a couple of proofreading ladies in my church. That was it. And Cindy. And I sent it in, and it wins 2 Carol Awards. And I'm being begged by my publisher for more. Nobody has that story, and I know that. So I got to the point when people say, your publishing journey, so tell me your story. I was like, no, I'm sorry. We need to spend a couple of months together, and then I'll tell you my story. Because every one of them had what you said. They had this long journey that full of trial and trouble, and finally got the prize. And I was like, I didn't pay any dues, it seems.
Yeah, well, but God's blessed you. I mean, obviously that's wonderful. Pam?
Well, you're not the only author that's had that, so don't feel entirely bad.
I have a question about what I've heard because I'm published traditionally and indie for children's books, but I have friends who are authors that feel like if you indie publish, you're not validated as a writer. Yet, and I have one friend who said, "Oh, well, they're not published; they're just printed." And I don't believe that, but there are a lot of my friends out there who feel like they want the validation of traditional publishing.
It was just a question: what age group are they in?
That I write?
Our age group. I consider us all basically in the same general age group. Are they in our age group or are they younger?
Oh, our age group. Yeah, okay, I'm 63, so yeah. Is that why?
Yeah, they've grown up with the thinking that anybody who's anybody, if you're legit, the traditional house has said yes, and if they haven't said yes, you're not legit. They've grown up with that.
Okay.
And I'm here to say, they said yes to me right off the bat, and I won. I had great sales, and I won all their awards, and I'm like, having had that. Here's the thing, while I'm at my 12th book with them, my wife's having to work, so we have medical insurance.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The money's not coming to me. It's going to all these other people and not me. And I actually got, when I got the Gary Smalley contract, because he was such a big name, they invited Gary Smalley and I to come to the publishing house and do a tour of the house, because they were just Gary. It wasn't because of me, but he only went with them because of me. He chose me to write his books with him, and then all of a sudden I'm we're worthy to. They've never asked me to come to the shop before, so they fly us out there, all expenses paid, tour the whole place, and they're all given the grand tour. We had a meeting with like all of their distributors from all over the world. Were at their meeting. It's like 200 people working for the publishing house, all there to hear Gary and I talk about the new series. And here's Gary. I wrote the books. Gary did not write the books. Gary served as probably like an editor, and he was like my number one fan. He was not. He's the one who insisted my name not only be on there, but first. And when everybody asked a question of him about the books, he said, "Why are you asking me? Dan wrote the books." He's a really humble guy. But I'm just saying that this was the thing. Gary was making a lot of money off his books because he just had major success. He was just the humblest guy, the nicest guy. I mean, the biggest blessing I had doing that was getting to know him before he died, because he died a couple years after the fourth book came out. But yeah, I'm just saying, I look at that validation thing. I looked at it, I thought, you know what? That while that was happening, like I said, my wife is home working. She couldn't go on the trip with me because she couldn't get off work, because we needed her to work to have health insurance. And I'm walking around this big place with all these cubicles, and everybody in that publishing company, guess what they had in their benefits package? Health insurance off of the back of my books, and all the other authors who were all mostly poor. It's like that. In that scene, I get the feeling that, like Vegas, the house always wins. It's not set up for the authors to succeed. It's set up for the publishers to succeed. Point in case, as soon as they start to, their sales dropped a little bit, guess who they drop like a rock? Yeah. If your sales drop a little bit, it's not like, oh, we're loyal to the end. The next one will be better. See ya. Author after author was getting dropped during that period of time when they're starting to see their sales go down. And I looked at it and I thought, okay, the only reason I'm not having my sales go down is Gary Smalley standing next to me. If my books were to drop off a little bit, yeah, I'd be gone too.
Wow.
I'm sorry. It's like it's a business. They're quote Christian publishers, but they run their business. It's not. I mean, they're like as ruthless maybe as secular publishers are, but it was not there. There was not this. It was very disillusioning, if I'm being honest. The people that I worked with, being honest, the editors and the people I actually worked with were the sweetest, nicest people. So I don't fault them. They're in that system too. But yeah, when I look at the whole of it, I didn't feel like I got served well by the experience. And I have never once looked back.
Makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, this has all just been so wonderful. And I thank you so much for sharing your story and the advice that you've given, and I think encouragement too. I think it is just like an eye-opening thing to think, you can do this, but it's going to take work. It's going to take, time. It's not going to be, you're going to be like that, 8 books to be an overnight success kind of
Logging it out. Yeah.
Likely. Yeah. Melissa, what's going on next week?
Jean's going to be coming to talk to us about how the weather affects you as a writer.
Yeah,
or whether the weather affects you as a writer.
Whether weather affects you. I saw that and I was like, okay, are we still doing that or not? I wasn't sure. So I thought I'd ask you. So that's kind of a different topic, but Jeannie really loves weather. So it should be a lot of fun, and we'll see what she comes up with. Thanks again, everybody, for being here. If you are watching the replay, I invite you to join our Facebook group, or to check out our Facebook page, where you can see all of our videos of our past episodes. This video with Dan will be up there very soon. And Dan, thank you again. We invite you to stay for our after party. We'll be on for about another 10 minutes, maybe, just chit-chatting with everybody. Otherwise, pardon?
Yeah, I probably need to go. I've got my son out there, and I'm supposed to take him to go pick up his car.
Okay. We will let you go then, but thanks everybody.
Thank you, Dan.
All right.
Here.
Really enjoyed it, folks. Love being with you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Hey, Jan. Hey, Jan, we'll be in touch. I got another one getting ready. I got a novella just finishing up this week. It's
Awesome.
half the size.
I'm one of his beta readers. I can't wait.
I'll be in touch. I'll be in touch with you and the team probably within a week or two.
All right, great.
We'll see you.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody.